Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Meet Deb Craven, president of Longo's, one of Canada's most popular grocery stores with dozens of locations and more on the way across Southern Ontario. I joined Deb in the Longo store support offices, and we talked about leadership and what it takes to innovate and compete in the crowded Southern Ontario grocery marketplace. Let's listen in now. Deb, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thanks for hosting me here at Longo's World Headquarters.
Pleasure to have you.
North of Toronto. You know, I've been here a bunch of times, sometimes with Retail Council, other times just to see some of the folks here. And I turn on this street and I don't recognize it anymore. Like I literally have to. The growth in this part of the city is just phenomenal.
It is amazing. Just on this street alone, it is distribution center after distribution center. And we'll talk about that, I think, a little bit later when we talk about our expansion and the difficulty in finding team members to work when there's so many other options, and how important infrastructure is to allow people to get to work easily in the location as well.
So I was driving down Langstaff and I was just about to turn onto the street here and I saw the remnants of a bike lane, and I'm like, this is the last place I would be cycling.
I just drove on that this morning as well. It would take a brave soul to get on a bike. And,
brave or desperate. So let's hope neither happens.
Like transport truck after transport truck after. Agreed.
Anyway, thanks for joining me on the pod. You and I've shared the stage last year, so it's not the first time we've had the chance to talk together. But so today we wanted to talk a little bit of a preview. We'll get to that later. You're going to be a keynote at Retail Council of Canada's Retail HR, so we'll get to that in a bit. Let's start a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Sarnia, so proud Sarnia, born and bred, and then went off to university at Waterloo at Laurier, and graduated from business in Laurier, and met my husband there, and then moved to Toronto. He was going to law school at U of T, so I went to Deloitte in Toronto, and then went on from there. Got my CA designation, CPA designation, it's called now, at Deloitte, and then moved on from there. So I was at Deloitte, I was at Canadian Tire, spent a lot of time at Purolator.
A lot of logistics in your background.
A lot of logistics, yeah. I just loved my time at Purolator. It's a fantastic company, Canadian owned, which is super important. Yeah, I was there off and on. Like I was there a couple of times, left and went back a couple of times, but 17 years. So that huge appreciation for the geography of Canada and how difficult it is to get products from A to B within Canada. It just was a huge learning experience. I was at Nike for a period of time as CFO for Nike Canada, which I love. So that was my first dipping my toe after Canadian Tire was in retail, but then Nike was really kind of jumping all in retail as well. And then
so that gives you the experience on the vendor side, which is
And then I went back to Canadian Tire and moved to Calgary for a couple of years, and Marks and Sportchek are headquartered out of there. So was the CFO for those two organizations there for a couple of years, and then moved back here and started my journey with Longo's.
Did you always want to be in business? Was that a set path for you from early days?
It was, yeah. I think like a lot of people, you can kind of watch what your parents do, and my dad was an accountant. He worked at a hospital. He ended up being CEO of a couple of hospitals in southwestern Ontario throughout his career. And so I watched what he did, and I was just intrigued by it. I volunteered at the hospital when I was in high school. I worked retail at the Sarnia Lambton Mall for any people who are from Sarnia, and worked retail there. But I saw a lot of what he did and the impact it had, and that you could be someone who was a business person that could really help people in lots of different ways, and you could get involved in the business in so many different ways. I just remember how much he valued the work that the nurses did. I just have a huge appreciation for that. And whenever it was negotiating time with the union, just how balanced he was about thinking about how important the services were that he were providing. And I thought, wow, as a business person, you have all of that knowledge and skill set, and you're still kind of have to see the other side, and you have to be able to balance those things together. Just a huge impact on me.
Now, leadership in retail, particularly grocers, they kind of generally, if you look at the leaders across your counterparts, some come from merchandising, some come from operations, some come from finance. You come from a logistics / finance and accounting. How does that experience with you working with the merchants? I mean, retail's about math, but it's also about the art and science of retail. So talk about that a little bit.
Very much so. I have learned to talk less and listen and walk more. And when I say walk the stores. So getting out with the merch team and
they see things very differently,
they
right?
Do. There is nothing more fascinating to walk a store with Anthony, Joey, Mike, Longo, people who've been doing this a long time. Our VPs of merch, Joey and Mimo, fantastic. So I've learned, as I said, I try not to say a lot. I try to, if I'm talking, I'm asking a lot of questions because I have so much to learn. But how they see the store and how they see the products and what they're watching the guests do while the guests are in the store.
You'll never go again to a grocery store and think the same way, right?
Never. Never. Yeah. Yeah.
The halcyon days of just enjoying a trip to the grocery store for you are pretty much over.
Well, my husband and kids laugh because we were in Ireland for a family vacation. My kids are adults and out of the house, but we did a family trip, and so they're both in their late 20s, and we were traveling all around Northern Ireland, and every grocery store we saw, and they would just be like, "Okay, we'll meet you in an hour."
Enough.
Yeah, and I got so excited, I'm like, "Oh, there's a Marks and Spencer. We have to go in there. You guys have to appreciate what they're doing here with their fresh."
Look at the lighting on that category.
Exactly. So they
Everybody's turning left, and they got the milk somewhere else. What are they doing? And that Irish butter. Why can't we get that Irish butter? Oh my God, it's managed dairy.
And the private label, and how much of the private label? So fair to say that the family is getting used to the fact that it probably takes me a good hour, and I'm still not really doing what I'm there to do, which is to, I'm there to look and learn.
You got nothing in your basket.
I'm just wandering. With big eyes.
Student of retail.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about Longos for those that have listeners across the country and around the world. Let's talk about Longos for those that may not be familiar.
Sure. Let me give you a little bit of history about Longos. So it was started by three brothers, Tommy, Joe, and Gus, and it was started in 1956 in about 2,000 square foot retail location with Castlefield and Yonge and Streets in Toronto. So tiny place, the full family, fully invested in it, everybody working there and working incredibly hard. And then that has, and I think as I was doing a little bit of reading about the history, it just quickly gained a reputation for the freshest produce. And I think it was because those were the uncompromising standards that those three founders really stood for. And that just has been ingrained all the way throughout. So that huge reputation for freshness and quality. And then it's grown to 38 stores today. One more about to open in about 5 weeks in Meadowvale that we're quite excited about. And another one about to open in Kitchener and around September, October.
Is Kitchener the farthest flung? I mean, you're Southern Ontario.
Guelph is, we have a store in Guelph now. So Kitchener will be,
Yeah, I mean, it gets back to your points earlier on about how big this country is. I often call it the diseconomy of scale. It's one thing to open up, far-flung locations. It's another, particularly in the grocery business, to keep them fed and keep those trucks rolling, right?
Yeah. Well, and what I'm learning, too, is appreciating the different markets that we're in. Every store has a different community it's serving. Yep. And so the guests that are coming to those stores are also different. So I'm just intrigued as we move to Kitchener, what's that guest and what are the similarities and the things that we're never going to veer from? And then what are the unique characteristics of each of the new markets we go to? Yeah. I think the other part about the Longos family for your listeners that might find interesting is back in, I think it was in 99 or 98, that was when the first, when Grocery Gateway first got started. It wasn't involved with the Longos at that point. It was on its own, but the owner and the founder approached Longos and said, hey, we need somewhere that we can source the groceries from. So we have a model that people can go online and book and then get home delivery, but we need someplace. And so the Longos are always generally ahead of their time that way. So they didn't, from what I understand from the stories, they didn't flinch. They were like, well, yes, this sounds like something we need to get involved in. We better learn about it. And so orders were being picked from Grocery Gateway from one of our stores at night. And that's how they made it work at the beginning. And then in 2004, then there was an opportunity to purchase Grocery Gateway. Yeah. And again, when I think it was the first home delivery of groceries in Canada.
Very early
and,
days.
Yeah, so for a scrappy little kind of, I'm not sure how many stores there were at that time, but there weren't, wasn't 38 at the time. So for a relatively small company to take that leap and say, we're going to be the first in Canada to really jump into this full-fledged, really, really interesting. It just, that
part of the DNA of the organization.
It is so part of the DNA. I was mentioning earlier, Anthony just spoke at the Mississauga Board of Trade this morning, and one of the examples he gave, and someone asked a question about innovation and what's it like to be kind of starting from a small family owned and growing. And one story that he shared that I was fascinated by is our distribution center. So generally, if I think at the time there were 7 stores in the network, and generally you would buy like a company like Longo's would buy from a wholesaler. And but the family took a look at it and took a look at the consolidation that was going on in the industry. And that, you know what, we want to be the master of our own destiny here. We want to make sure that we are the ones that are controlling our supply chain. We don't want to have to be relying. There's going to continue to be consolidation.
Yep.
And so they said, they tried to make sure that they were trying to work as best as they could in that environment. But then they said, you know what, we need to own our own supply chain and relationships.
Got to see around that corner, right?
Yeah. And so they built their own distribution center at this location that you and I are sitting at. And for a chain of 7 stores to say, no,
big bet.
Yeah,
That's a big
we
bet.
are going to negotiate directly with vendors. And so to put all of that work into the vendor relationships, build the distribution center, and now in another couple of months, we're about to open the expansion to the DC. So we're doubling the size of it.
Wow.
From 180 to 360,000 square feet. So huge. Really excited about that with some automation. But it just shows that's the thinking and the entrepreneurship and the belief in growth that the company's had for a long time, just in the DNA, as you said.
If you and I were on an elevator together, how would you say that Longo's distinguishes itself from a very competitive Southern Ontario grocery market? What is it distinctive? What is that draws people into your stores? Quality
and service. So it is the quality of the fresh department, walking in, like as I'm envisioning walking through a store, like making that right and going into that beautiful produce section, all the prepared foods. And the fact that if you're looking for something at any path within the store, even within the grocery aisles, if you're looking for something, that there's going to be someone there who's close enough that if you can't find what you're looking for, you can just reach out very quickly. And that person will not just say, go to aisle 7, it's on the left-hand side at the end. They will take you there and walk you there and help you find it. And then say, is there anything else I can help you with? And I think that is, that's a differentiator. I think the view of the guest in terms of what the guest is looking for in terms of, I want to go and buy something that I'm going to make a meal from scratch, or I want healthy choices, or I want to go where some of the prep has been done for me and I can finish it off at home, or I want to buy something that's all the prep is done and I'm just going to take it on my way and either eat it on the way or eat it once I get home. I think it's about having that. I think that's what a lot of our time is spent on, is where's the guest and what is the guest looking for, and then how do we make sure that we're providing that to them.
Fantastic. You talked about taking risks, so I wanted to take the time to ask you one question. So my podcasting partner and good friend Steve Dennis is releasing his book, Leaders Leap, and he just wrote an article, and I forwarded it to you from Harvard Business Review. And the essence is, and it was almost the title of the book, the curse of the timid transformation. In other words, his thesis is that, competitive market, scarcity is over. There's a lot of things that make it that you need to be remarkable, and then your transformations fail if they're not bold enough. And if if they're not, you're not taking bigger swings, and doing nothing is more risky now than taking these bigger swings. How does that resonate with you? How do you think about that thesis?
Yes, I think we're proving it true. I think, and we're living it every day. I can't imagine any retailer that isn't, without constantly looking around the corner and seeing and trying to see what's ahead, and then taking some of those big moves. When I think about what the Longo's family did with Grocery Gateway, great example of that. Yep. Where I would say that it's continuing to happen is certainly through the environmental initiatives and DE&I is a lot of the investments. Our Stouffville store, as an example, is, I think, virtually footprint free, right? Not leaving any footprint. We've got
you won like LEED awards for that store, right?
It's
a
incredible.
Touchstone benchmark store.
That's
in Ontario.
right.
Yeah.
And ahead of its time, before anybody else was doing that. And then the learnings from that store in terms of then putting a lot of forward thinking environmental pieces in all of our stores. When we think of the refrigeration units that we're putting in the stores, when you think of the solar panels that we have on a number of the roofs. We were just at a kickoff at our North Oakville store where we have the superchargers, the e-chargers for the vehicles in our parking lot, and through an initiative with the government. It's kind of being ahead of the curve that way, and building those partnerships. I think that's another part of the big leap, right? Is not thinking that you have to do it all yourself, but being super open to talking to different people who are thinking about things in a different way and saying, oh, you know what, we might be actually able to partner with you to do that. You don't have to do it.
You don't have to know all the. I mean, that's.
You don't.
It's interesting you bring that up because it is another central thread of thinking through Steve's book. Is that the nature of leadership has evolved, and
that's right.
When he and I and probably yourself were growing up, and earlier in our career, the leaders at the top had to have all the answers.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And they were looked upon as, if you don't have all the answers, what are you doing in that chair kind of philosophy? Or at least that was the mental frame that they approached with. And that's just so different today. So that brings us to the Retail Council of Canada's HR conference. You're going to be keynote on the stage. Give us a preview of what your kind of knowledge you'll be dropping on the stage. Yeah,
I'm really excited about this. Longo's, like every company, does an annual engagement survey with all of our team members. And then we ask and plead with all of our team members to say, please fill in this survey, go in. It'll only take a couple of minutes, go in and give us your honest feedback. And then generally, like a lot of other places I've worked as well, we were doing the same thing where you'd get a bunch of numbers back, and it was all numbers. And then each leader would get their report for their team. You would hope that your numbers were good. And then you'd be asked to go and talk to your team and find out what you need to be doing to do better. And some people did it and some people didn't, and everybody did it in a different way. And what Liz Volk, our CHRO, what she really pushed us on, and me specifically, and I'm so thankful for this, is she said, we need to find what's behind those numbers. Because our engagement survey was kind of stuck. It was high for our industry, so that's huge. We're so proud of that. It's a big part of our culture is our high level of team member engagement. But it was stuck. And so how do we unstick it? A little bit of Groundhog Day every year for the associates and for their managers. Like, okay, so we're at 30, we're whatever, and we're at the same number. Great, thank you. That's right.
How do you get unstuck, I guess, is what you're talking
it was about unsticking. And so Liz really pushed us. And so her and her team came forward with a proposition for me and to say, why don't we hold listening sessions where we will sit down with store team members, DC team members, everyone within the support center, IT, marketing, and we'll sit down with them and just give them a chance to talk directly to Liz. So it was Liz and I, and then there were no VPs, no directors, no managers. It was the team members who are there for the store, the team members who are there serving the guests every single day. And that first session was so interesting because it took a while for people to get a little bit more comfortable saying, well, what's all this about? Yeah. And for us to promise that whatever you say here is not going to be, we want that feedback, and we're going to use it to make good things happen. And so once people got comfortable with it and word got out about it, we just had these amazing sessions where people were telling us, and I always say to people I'm continuing to have these listening sessions, I always know it's going to get good when someone says, well, I'm not sure if I should say this, or, can we talk about the elephant in the room? And as soon as someone says that, I'm like, oh, this is about to get really good. Get your pens ready. Exactly. This is going to get really, really good. And then that's when we unearth these things that people have been holding on to, and they haven't known how to share it. And so we have invested a lot of time in this. But then what we've done from it is said for each listening session we hold for each team, we say, well, here are the themes and here are the actions that are specific to this team. And then the HR department has helped us put together a dashboard. And we share it with the teams regularly that says, here's all the things that you suggested. Here are the things that we've already acted on. They were quick wins. And so you should see these changes happening already. If you haven't, talk to your manager. here's the things that are going to take a little bit more time within 3 months, but here's the actions, and you'll see these happen within 3 months. Here are the things that are going to take us a little bit longer. And then here are the things that, great suggestions, they're not on the radar right now. Because I think that's almost just as important to be transparent about that. So each team, we've got those ones that are specific to the teams, and then we've got overarching ones for the company. And I'm really happy with how that's going, and it's bringing engagement to life. And it also coincided with me just moving into the president role. So it just a little intimidating trying to step into a role that Anthony has had for 25 years. Big shoes.
And you have your people here have a lot of tenure, whether it's in the stores or whether it's in the store support.
It amazes me. 20 years, 30 years, 35 years. And so, a little intimidating. And so these listening sessions have just been such a huge opportunity for me to hear directly from the team members, for them to get a chance to get to know me, and for me to build a relationship with them, and for me to have a lot more confidence now when we're at strategy sessions, when we're making decisions, to be able to say, actually, no. The unfiltered feedback I got from those listening sessions is telling me that this is important. So you might be thinking it's not important at the VP level or director level, but I know from talking. And so it's given me just a huge amount of confidence, and I feel like I'm speaking on behalf of the team members when I'm really pushing for the things that I know are really important for them now.
Fantastic. So, yes. Fantastic. All right. Well, that's going to be a great session. What a great preview. Last question for you, continuing on this advice thing. Advice for the listeners who may not be able to see you live in person. And I frame it in 2 starts and 1 stop. 2 things leaders in retail should start doing if they're not, and 1 thing that they should stop doing. Maybe it's a habit, maybe you've tried it and it's not working, or maybe the times have moved on. Anything come to mind? Yeah.
For the first start, I think for me it is, and I would be shocked, stunned, and amazed if anybody listening doesn't have the same thought. How do we leverage all of this data that we have? We have so much data, piles and piles of it. And how do we leverage it into actionable insights? And then where does AI play in that? And how can we leverage that in a good way, use it for good, to make sure that we're getting to actionable insights so that we're allowing our team members to make the changes they want to make and quickly get to those insights without having to then manually process all of this data, but using technology and AR for good. So I'm spending a lot of time thinking about that and trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing there. I think another start is we're spending a lot of time thinking about how do you provide and communicate value in such a crowded, competitive, and loud market. There's lots going on right now about talking about grocery stores and supply chain and inflation. And I think inflation.
Just general Canadians are very concerned about affordability in all its ways and forms. Right?
Yeah. And so how do you have a clear voice there to say, here's what we stand for, here's how we provide value, here's why you should come to us, and here's what we do. So I think we've always had a pretty clear view on that. I think the environment has changed quite a bit, and we just have to make sure that we're making sure we're taking advantage of all of the messaging that we can do to make sure that we provide a clear message to our guests in such a crowded, loud environment.
Basically, I think it feels like the task is we got to keep to our DNA, keep what makes us special, but be right for the time.
That's right. Yeah. Meet the guest where they are, right?
Yeah.
And
as you said, very early on.
Yeah. And the guest has been through quite a journey in the last little while.
Quite a journey. Okay, so what should retailers stop doing?
My stop goes back to these listening sessions because it's so top of mind. Stop assuming that you know the whys about why things are happening with your team. Stop assuming that what you're hearing from potentially your direct reports, your managers, stop assuming that is the full story. It's probably part of the story. And so establish a direct rapport and figure out how you're going to get that true feedback from your team members so that you can make sure you're tackling the things that are truly important to them. That's just been one of the biggest learnings I've had this year.
All right. Well, fantastic. Thanks so much for sitting down with me, chitting and chatting for the Voice of Retail podcast. Real treat to hear more. You know, I'm a big fan of the business. I'm there every Friday. So
Thank you.
I have a particular perspective when I shop on a day-to-day basis. So it's great to hear it from you and your perspective. So once again, thanks for taking the time and joining me on the pod.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Loved it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.